The blood-red sun dipped low on the horizon as Theodora Hayes stared down the barrel of her father's Winchester rifle, her gaze never wavering from the intruder who had dared to trespass on the land she'd fought tooth and nail to keep. It was 1875, and the Wyoming Territory showed no mercy to women who dared to claim their independence. But Thea had buried too many loved ones to surrender what remained of her family's legacy. "Miss, I believe there's been a misunderstanding," the tall stranger said, slowly raising his hands, his blue eyes reflecting the dying sunlight. "I'm not here to cause trouble." "That's what the last 3 men said before trying to run me off my property," Thea replied, her fingers steady on the trigger. "State your business, mister, or start walking back the way you came." The dust-covered traveler removed his hat, revealing a shock of wavy chestnut hair. "Name's Wade Blackburn. I've been hired as the new ranch hand at the Singing River property." He reached carefully into his vest pocket and produced a folded letter. "Got the correspondence right here." Thea narrowed her eyes, keeping the rifle trained on him while gesturing for him to place the letter on a nearby fence post. She approached cautiously, snatched the paper and backed away, never breaking her aim. The letter bore her uncle's familiar handwriting confirmation that he'd hired help without consulting her again. "My uncle may have hired you, Mr. Blackburn, but he doesn't run this ranch, I do," she said, lowering her rifle slightly. "And I don't recall requesting assistance." Wade Blackburn's weathered face broke into a tentative smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "With all respect, madam, your uncle mentioned you might say that. He also mentioned that with winter approaching, the Hayes Ranch needs more than one pair of hands to survive till spring." Thea felt the familiar burn of frustration. Ever since her father's passing 2 years ago, her Uncle Harold had been trying to manage her life from 2 towns over, convinced a woman couldn't possibly maintain a cattle ranch alone. What he failed to understand was that she'd been running it alongside her father since she was 14. "I've managed just fine on my own," she insisted, though the ache in her shoulders and the calluses on her palms told a different story. The drought had made the past summer brutal, and the approaching winter promised its own challenges. Wade shifted his weight, his expression sincere. "I don't doubt your capabilities, Miss Hayes, but even the strongest rancher needs sleep occasionally." He gestured toward the neglected north pasture fence, "And from what I can see, you haven't had much of that lately." Thea followed his gaze to the broken fence she hadn't found time to repair. Anger flared in her chest, not at him, but at the truth in his words. "1 month," she said finally. "I'll give you 1 month to prove your worth. You'll take orders from me, not my uncle, and you'll sleep in the bunkhouse alone." Wade nodded, replacing his hat. "Fair terms, I appreciate the opportunity." "Don't appreciate it yet," Thea warned, slinging the rifle over her shoulder. "I work from sunup to sundown. I expect the same from you." "I wouldn't have it any other way," he replied, gathering the reins of his horse. "Though I should mention, I also cook a mean venison stew." Despite herself, Thea's stomach growled audibly. It had been days since she'd had a proper meal, subsisting mainly on hardtack and coffee between endless chores. "We'll see about that," she said, turning toward the house to hide the slight softening in her expression. "The bunkhouse is that way. Get settled and meet me in the barn in 20 minutes. There's still daylight enough to check the south herd." As Wade led his horse toward the bunkhouse, Thea watched him from the corner of her eye. There was something in his measured gait that spoke of a man who had seen his share of hardship. Not the typical drifter her uncle usually sent her way, those never lasted more than a week. "Miss Hayes," he called after her, causing her to pause. "Thank you for not shooting me on sight. I reckon that's a better welcome than most get around here." Despite herself, a small smile tugged at her lips. "Don't make me regret it, Mr. Blackburn." Little did she know how those words would echo in her mind in the weeks to come. The following morning arrived with a biting chill that hinted at the coming winter. Thea rose before dawn, as was her custom, pulling on her worn trousers and flannel shirt. She had just finished brewing coffee when a knock at the kitchen door startled her. Wade stood on the porch, already dressed for work, his breath visible in the cold morning air. Thought I'd check if there's anything that needs immediate attention before we start the day. Thea blinked, surprised by his punctuality. Coffee, she offered, stepping aside to let him in. Much obliged, he said, removing his hat as he entered. He remained standing, seemingly conscious of the impropriety of being in a single woman's home before sunrise. She poured him a cup, noting the careful way he held the chipped mug. His hands were calloused and strong, but there was a gentleness to his movements that caught her attention. The north pasture fence needs fixing before any more cattle wander off, she said, returning to business. And we need to move the herd closer to the winter shelter. Wade nodded, sipping his coffee. I noticed the barn roof could use some patching too. First rain might cause trouble otherwise. Thea had been putting off that repair for weeks. You know roofing? I know a bit of everything, he replied without a hint of boasting. Been working ranches since I was 12. My pa believed in learning by doing. And where is your father now? She asked, immediately regretting the personal question. A shadow crossed Wade's face. Buried him 5 years back. Took a bullet meant for me during a cattle rustling. He was a good man. Thea felt a pang of recognition. I lost my father to pneumonia 2 winters ago. He was too stubborn to see a doctor until it was too late. Something unspoken passed between them, a mutual understanding of loss and the burden of carrying on alone. For just a moment, Thea felt the weight on her shoulders lighten. The moment passed as quickly as it had come. We should get started, she said, draining her cup and moving toward the door. Daylight's wasting. They worked side by side throughout the morning, repairing the north fence. Wade matched her pace without complaint, even as the sun climbed higher and the work grew more strenuous. What impressed Thea most was that he neither tried to take over nor treated her as if she needed special consideration. He simply worked alongside her as an equal. By midday, they had completed the fence repairs and moved on to checking the herd. Thea rode her chestnut mare confidently, while Wade followed on his dappled gray stallion. As they approached the grazing cattle, Wade's stallion suddenly reared, startled by a rattlesnake hidden in the tall grass. With lightning reflexes, Wade controlled his mount while drawing his revolver. The shot rang out, cleanly dispatching the snake before it could strike. Good eye, Thea acknowledged, impressed by his marksmanship. Had a run-in with one of those devils when I was younger, Wade explained, holstering his gun. Never forgot the sound. Your cattle seem healthy, though. Good weight on them despite the drought. I've been supplementing their grazing with hay from the eastern field, she explained. It's not ideal, but it's kept them from dropping too much weight. Wade nodded appreciatively. Smart thinking. Most ranchers I've worked for would have sold off half the herd by now. This herd was my father's pride, Thea said, her voice softening. He spent 20 years developing this bloodline. I won't let a single season undo that work. They rode in companionable silence for a while, checking the condition of each animal. When they reached the far side of the pasture, Wade suddenly pointed toward a cluster of rocks. Miss Hayes, I believe you've got a calving situation. Thea followed his gaze to where a heifer was clearly in distress, partially hidden behind a boulder. They quickly dismounted and approached the struggling animal. She's having trouble, Thea assessed, kneeling beside the heifer. Calf's positioned wrong. Without hesitation, Wade removed his coat and rolled up his sleeves. I'll need to turn it. Can you keep her calm? For the next 30 minutes, they worked together seamlessly. Thea soothed the frightened heifer while Wade carefully repositioned the calf. His hands were steady and sure, his movements deliberate but gentle. Almost there, he murmured, concentration etched on his face. With one final adjustment, the calf began to emerge properly. There we go. She can handle the rest now. They watched as the heifer delivered a healthy bull calf, both of them smiling with satisfaction as the newborn struggled to stand on wobbly legs. Good work, Mr. Blackburn, Thea said, genuine respect in her voice. Wade, he corrected gently. If we're going to be delivering calves together, I think we can dispense with formalities. After ensuring the mother and calf were stable, they remounted and continued their rounds. By late afternoon, dark clouds had gathered on the horizon, threatening an early storm. We should head back, Thea suggested, eyeing the sky with concern. Those clouds look like they mean business. They had just turned their horses toward home when the first fat raindrops began to fall. Within minutes, the gentle rain transformed into a deluge. Thea's hat provided little protection as the downpour intensified. "There's an old line shack about half a mile east," she shouted over the thundering rain. "We can wait it out there," Wade nodded, and they urged their horses into a careful gallop across the increasingly muddy terrain. By the time they reached the dilapidated shack, both riders were soaked to the skin. The small wooden structure was barely more than 4 walls and a roof, but it was dry inside. Thea fumbled with cold fingers to light the old lantern that hung from a ceiling beam while Wade tended to the horses under the small attached lean-to. "That came on fast," Wade commented, shaking water from his hat as he entered. "Weather out here has always had a mean streak." Thea nodded, struggling to control her shivering. "Spring and fall are the worst for sudden storms, though this is early even for September." Wade noticed her trembling and frowned. Without a word, he shrugged out of his duster and draped it around her shoulders. Though damp on the outside, the inside lining was still relatively dry. "You need it more than I do," he insisted when she tried to protest. "Besides, I've weathered worse." Something about his quiet concern made Thea's chest tighten. It had been so long since anyone had shown her such simple kindness without expectation. "Thank you," she said softly, pulling the coat tighter around her. Wade busied himself gathering some old pieces of wood from the corner and arranging them in the small stone fireplace. With practiced efficiency, he started a small fire that gradually filled the shack with warmth and flickering light. "Should warm up soon," he said, settling on an overturned crate across from her. "Storm like this usually blows over quick." Thea nodded, watching him through the firelight. There was something about Wade Blackburn that didn't quite fit the typical ranch hand mold. His speech was educated, his mannerisms refined despite his rugged appearance. "You never mentioned where you were before my uncle hired you," she ventured. Wade's eyes met hers briefly before returning to the fire. "Colorado, mostly. Did some work for the Diamond Tea outfit near Denver. That's cattle country," Thea observed. "What brought you to Wyoming?" A shadow crossed his features. "Needed a change of scenery." Sometimes a man wears out his welcome in one place. The evasiveness of his answer suggested there was more to the story, but Thea recognized the look of someone who preferred to keep certain chapters of their life private. She understood that better than most. "Well, Wyoming's got scenery to spare," she said, letting the matter drop. "Though most find it more desolate than desirable," Wade's expression softened. "I've always found beauty in places others overlook. This land has character, unforgiving at times, but honest in its way." His words struck a chord with Thea. It was precisely how she felt about her ranch, though she'd never articulated it quite so eloquently. The rain continued its assault on the roof as they sat in comfortable silence. Eventually, Wade reached into his saddlebag and produced a small package wrapped in waxed paper. "Brought some jerky and biscuits," he offered, unwrapping the modest meal. "Not much, but better than nothing." They shared the simple food, their fingers occasionally brushing as they reached for the same piece. Each accidental touch sent an unexpected warmth through Thea that had nothing to do with the fire. "Tell me about your father," Wade said after a while. "Sounds like he was quite a rancher." Thea smiled, memories flooding back. "Thomas Hayes was the stubbornest man I ever knew. Came out here with nothing but 20 head of cattle and a dream. My mother thought he was crazy, but she loved him enough to follow." Her expression grew wistful. "She died when I was 8 influenza. After that, it was just Pa and me. He taught you ranching." "Everything he knew," Thea confirmed. "Never treated me any different because I was a girl. Said capability wasn't determined by what you wore, but by what you were willing to learn." Her voice hardened slightly. Not everyone shared his viewpoint. Wade nodded understandingly. "People can be small-minded about what they don't understand. Your father sounds like a wise man." "He was," Thea agreed, though the town never quite forgave him for raising his daughter like a son, as they put it. She mimicked the disapproving tone of the local gossips, as if learning to rope cattle and mend fences somehow made me less of a woman. "Their loss," Wade said simply. Seems to me you're exactly the kind of person this land needs, someone who understands and respects it." His words, spoken with such genuine conviction, caught Thea off guard. For years, she'd endured backhanded comments and outright criticism for her unconventional ways. Even the men who expressed interest in her seemed more concerned with acquiring her land than appreciating her capabilities. "What about you?" she asked, deflecting from the unexpected emotion his comment had stirred. "Any family waiting somewhere?" Wade shook his head. "No one to speak of. Had a brother once but lost him in the war. Parents gone. Makes for light traveling at least." His attempt at levity didn't quite reach his eyes. "I'm sorry," Thea said softly. Wade shrugged, but there was a vulnerability in his expression that tugged at her. "Life has its way of shaping us, doesn't it? Sometimes through what it gives, sometimes through what it takes away." Outside, the rain began to slacken, the drumming on the roof growing less intense. Thea rose and moved to the small window, peering out at the clearing sky. "Looks like we can head back soon," she observed, turning back to find Wade standing much closer than she'd anticipated. For a moment, they stood just inches apart, the firelight casting dancing shadows across their faces. Thea felt her breath catch as something unspoken passed between them, a recognition, perhaps, of kindred spirits. "We should go," she said finally, breaking the spell. "There's still the barn roof to consider, especially after this rain." Wade nodded, stepping back. "Of course, after you, Miss Hayes." "Thea," she corrected, surprising herself. "If we're going to be running this ranch together, even temporarily, you might as well use my name." A genuine smile spread across Wade's face. "Thea it is, then." As they rode back to the ranch through the freshly washed landscape, Thea found herself wondering what other storms might be on the horizon and whether this quiet, enigmatic cowboy would still be around when they hit. The following weeks saw a rhythm develop between them. Each morning, Wade would arrive at the kitchen door just as Thea finished brewing coffee. They would discuss the day's tasks over steaming cups before heading out to work. True to his word, Wade proved himself invaluable, fixing the barn roof, helping with the remaining fence repairs, and even rebuilding the chicken coop that had been slowly collapsing for months. What Thea hadn't anticipated was how much she would come to enjoy his company. Wade was that rare combination of capable and considerate. He worked tirelessly, but never made her feel as though he was carrying more than his share. More importantly, he respected her authority without question, deferring to her decisions regarding the ranch's management. It was during the third week of his employment that the first real test of their partnership arose. Thea had ridden into town for supplies, a trip she typically dreaded due to the inevitable gossip and disapproving glances from the townspeople. As she loaded her purchases onto her wagon, she overheard a conversation from the group of men lounging outside the saloon. "Shame about old Thomas Hayes' place," one man drawled loudly enough for her to hear. "Fine piece of land going to waste under a woman's care." "Won't last the winter without a man running things proper," another agreed. "Heard she's got some drifter working for her now, probably warming her bed too, only explanation for why she'd keep him around." Laughter erupted from the group, followed by even cruder speculation. Thea's cheeks burned with anger and humiliation, but she forced herself to continue loading her supplies, refusing to give them the satisfaction of seeing her reaction. "Gentlemen," a familiar voice cut through the laughter. Thea turned to see Wade approaching from the general store, his expression calm but his eyes hard as flint. "I couldn't help but overhear your conversation." The men straightened, sizing up the newcomer. The largest of the group, a burly man with a thick mustache whom Thea recognized as Samuel Wilson, the banker's son, stepped forward. "No concern of yours, stranger," Wilson said dismissively. "Just discussing local business." "Miss Hayes' ranch seems very much like her business, not yours," Wade replied evenly. "And as her employee, I take issue with how you're discussing my employer." Wilson's face darkened. "Look here, Cowboy, that woman's playing at a man's game. Everyone in town knows it's just a matter of time before she fails. Her daddy should have had the sense to sell that land to someone who could handle it proper before he died." Wade remained unnervingly calm, Interesting perspective. Though from what I've seen, Miss Hayes runs one of the best maintained ranches in the territory. Certainly puts Wilson Creek to shame. The barb hit home. Wilson's father's ranch was notoriously mismanaged despite their family's wealth. Samuel's face flushed red. "You'd best watch your mouth, Drifter," he growled. "You don't know who you're talking to?" "I believe I'm talking to someone who lacks both manners and facts," Wade replied, his hand casually resting near his holstered revolver. "Now, I suggest you and your friends find another topic of conversation, one that doesn't involve spreading lies about a woman who works harder than the lot of you combined." For a tense moment, Thea thought violence might erupt. The atmosphere crackled with tension as Wilson and Wade stared each other down. Finally, Wilson spat on the ground and stepped back. "Not worth my time," he muttered. "Come on, boys, let's leave the lady and her lapdog to their business." As the men shuffled away, Wade approached Thea's wagon. "Need a hand with those supplies?" he asked, as if the confrontation hadn't occurred. Thea studied him, a mixture of gratitude and irritation swirling within her. "I could have handled that myself," she said finally. "I know you could have," Wade replied, lifting a heavy sack of flour into the wagon bed. "But why should you have to? Those men were out of line." "That's nothing new," Thea said, securing the last of her purchases. "Been dealing with their type since I took over the ranch." Wade's expression softened. "Doesn't make it right. A person deserves to be judged by their actions, not their gender." As they finished loading the wagon, Thea noticed several townspeople watching them with renewed interest. She could practically see the rumors forming behind their curious gazes. "Well, you've certainly given them something new to gossip about," she observed as they prepared to leave town. "Let them talk," Wade said with a dismissive shrug. "People who spend their time judging others rarely accomplish much themselves." As they drove the wagon back to the ranch, Thea found herself studying Wade's profile. The man was becoming more of a puzzle with each passing day. He had the rough edges of someone who'd lived a hard life, yet spoke with the wisdom of a much older soul. "Thank you," she said finally, breaking the comfortable silence between them. "For what you said back there, not many men would stand up for a woman's right to run her own business." Wade glanced at her, the late afternoon sun highlighting the golden flecks in his blue eyes. "I meant every word. Your father would be proud of what you've accomplished here." Something in his sincere delivery made Thea's heart stutter in a way that both thrilled and frightened her. It had been so long since she'd allowed herself to feel anything beyond determination and duty. The possibility that she might be developing feelings for Wade Blackburn was a complication she hadn't anticipated. Upon their return to the ranch, they unloaded the supplies in companionable silence. As Wade carried the last sack of feed into the storage shed, Thea noticed a man on horseback approaching the main house. "Uncle Harold," she muttered, recognizing her father's brother's distinctive riding posture even at a distance. "Perfect timing, as always." Wade followed her gaze. "Your uncle." "The one who sent me," Thea nodded grimly. "Probably here to check if I've run the place into the ground yet. He visits every few months, always with some new suggestion for how I should be managing things." Harold Hayes was a tall, imposing man with a carefully trimmed gray beard and the bearing of someone accustomed to authority. He dismounted with the stiffness of age, but maintained the straight-backed posture that had intimidated Thea as a child. "Theodora," he greeted formally as she approached. "The place is still standing, I see." "Hello, Uncle," she replied, forcing civility into her tone. "What brings you all the way from Rock Springs?" Harold's gaze shifted to Wade, who had hung back respectfully. "I see you kept Blackburn on. Good." "I selected him specifically for his experience with troubled properties." The implication that her ranch was troubled stung, but Thea kept her expression neutral. "Mr. Blackburn has been a valuable addition," she acknowledged, though the ranch was hardly in crisis before his arrival. Harold made a noncommittal sound, his attention still on Wade. "Blackburn, a word if you please." Wade approached, removing his hat respectfully. "Mr. Hayes, good to see you again, sir." "Walk with me," Harold instructed, already moving toward the barn. I want your assessment of the situation here. Thea started to follow, but her uncle turned and fixed her with a stern look. Privately, if you don't mind, Theodora, man to man. The dismissal was so blatant that Thea felt as if she'd been slapped. She stood rooted to the spot as the two men walked away, anger boiling in her chest. After seeing to her uncle's horse, she retreated to the kitchen and busied herself preparing dinner, chopping vegetables with more force than necessary. Through the window, she could see Wade and Harold in serious conversation near the corral. Twice, she saw her uncle gesture emphatically toward different parts of the ranch, while Wade listened with his characteristic calm attention. By the time they returned to the house, Thea had composed herself enough to present a dignified front. Whatever her uncle's schemes might be, she wouldn't give him the satisfaction of seeing how deeply his dismissal had wounded her. "Something smells delicious," Harold commented as he entered the kitchen. "At least your mother's cooking lessons weren't wasted, even if you've abandoned most of her other teachings." Thea bit back a sharp retort. "Stew will be ready shortly. Would you like to wash up first?" "I've prepared the guest room for you." Harold nodded approvingly. "Yes, I'll be staying the night. Blackburn and I have more to discuss regarding the ranch's future." The proprietary way he spoke of her ranch ignited fresh anger in Thea, but she maintained her composure. "And what future might that be, Uncle? The one where I continue to run my father's legacy as he intended, or the one where you finally convince me to sell to your friends at the Cattle Association?" Harold's expression hardened. "Your father's legacy, as you call it, is 50 acres of struggling ranchland that's one bad season away from bankruptcy. Thomas always was too stubborn to see reason, a trait you've unfortunately inherited. This ranch has weathered worse than a dry summer," Thea countered. "We'll make it through winter just fine." "Perhaps," Harold conceded, though his tone suggested otherwise. "But for how long? A woman alone can't possibly—" "She's not alone," Wade interrupted, entering the kitchen behind Harold. "And from what I've seen, Miss Hayes is more than capable of managing this ranch successfully." Harold turned, clearly annoyed at the interruption. "You've been here, 3 weeks? Hardly enough time to make an informed judgment." He turned back to Thea. "I hired Blackburn to give you assistance, yes, but also to provide an objective assessment. The Cattle Association has made another offer, a generous one this time. With that money, you could move to town, perhaps open a dress shop or teach school something more suitable." "More suitable?" Thea repeated incredulously. "This ranch is my home, Uncle Harold. It's my life. I've put everything into maintaining what Pa built. And that's admirable, my dear." "Truly," Harold said in the patronizing tone she'd come to despise. "But the simple fact is, a woman's place is behind a man." Wade suggested, his voice quiet but firm as he stepped forward. "Is that what you were going to say, Mr. Hayes?" Harold stiffened. "I was going to say that a woman's place is where society has determined it to be. The frontier is no place for a woman alone." Wade's gaze met Thea's briefly before he turned back to Harold. "With all due respect, sir, if her place is meant to be behind a man, then perhaps the right man would stand behind her instead." The kitchen fell silent as the implications of Wade's statement hung in the air. Thea felt a rush of emotion, gratitude, surprise, and something deeper she wasn't ready to name. Harold looked between them, his expression calculating. "I see," he said finally. "Well, this is an interesting development." "Uncle," Thea began, but Harold raised a hand to silence her. "We'll discuss this further after dinner," he said firmly. "I find I am quite hungry after the long ride." The meal that followed was tense, with conversation limited to safe topics like weather and town gossip. Harold dominated what little dialogue there was, while Thea and Wade exchanged occasional glances across the table. After dinner, Harold insisted on speaking with Thea alone. They retired to the small sitting room while Wade tactfully excused himself to check on the livestock. "So," Harold began once they were alone, "you and Blackburn?" "There is no me and Blackburn," Thea clarified, though the denial felt hollow even to her own ears. "He's an employee who respects my authority, nothing more." Harold raised a skeptical eyebrow. "A man doesn't speak the way he did without personal investment, and I saw how you looked at each other." Thea felt heat rise to her cheeks. Whatever you think you saw, what I saw, Harold interrupted, was a possibility I hadn't considered. He leaned forward in his chair. Perhaps I've been approaching this all wrong. If you were to marry a proper rancher who could take over the operation, I might be persuaded to stop pressing for a sale. Thea stared at him in disbelief. You can't be serious. You'd accept my staying here, but only if I had a husband to take over. As if I haven't been running this place successfully for 2 years. Successfully is a matter of perspective, Harold countered. But yes, with a husband, particularly one with Blackburn's evident experience, I believe the ranch could prosper. Your father always intended for you to marry Theodora. He simply didn't live long enough to see it happen. Don't presume to tell me what my father wanted, Thea said coldly. He raised me to be independent, to think for myself. He raised you like a son because he never had one, Harold retorted. It was a disservice to you as a woman. But perhaps it's not too late to rectify that. Blackburn seems interested. He's capable, respectable. Stop. Thea cut him off, rising from her chair. I will not discuss marrying a man I've known for less than a month simply to appease your outdated notions of propriety. This conversation is over. Harold watched her with a mixture of frustration and calculation. Very well, but my offer stands. Find a suitable husband to help manage this ranch by spring, or I'll be forced to take more decisive action regarding my brother's estate. What does that mean? Thea demanded. It means there are legal avenues I haven't yet pursued, Harold replied cryptically. Think about it, Theodora. I'll take my leave in the morning. After her uncle retired to the guest room, Thea escaped to the front porch, needing fresh air to clear her thoughts. The night was cool and clear, with stars scattered like diamond dust across the vast Wyoming sky. She was so lost in troubled contemplation that she didn't hear Wade approach until he spoke. Everything all right? He asked quietly, keeping a respectful distance. Thea sighed, too emotionally exhausted for pretense. My uncle believes I need a husband to run this ranch properly. Apparently, all my work counts for nothing without a man's name attached to it. Wade leaned against the porch railing, his profile illuminated by the soft light spilling from the house windows. Some men find it easier to dismiss what they don't understand than to reconsider their beliefs. He suggested I marry you, Thea blurted out, immediately regretting her candor when Wade's head snapped toward her in surprise. I see, he said carefully. And what did you tell him? Thea felt her cheeks warm. That I wouldn't discuss marrying someone I've known less than a month. A small smile played at the corner of Wade's mouth. A reasonable position. He's threatening to take legal action if I don't find a suitable husband by spring, she continued, anger creeping back into her voice. As if my worth as a rancher depends on having a man's name beside mine on the deed. Wade was quiet for a long moment, his gaze returning to the star-filled sky. Your uncle is wrong, he said finally, about a woman's place being behind a man. The best partnerships I've seen in ranching or in life are those where people stand beside each other, each contributing their strengths. His words resonated deeply with Thea. It was exactly how her parents' marriage had been before her mother's untimely death. Equal partners, each respecting the other's contributions. Thank you, she said softly, for what you said earlier about standing behind me. No one's ever defended my right to run this ranch quite like that before. Wade turned to face her fully. I meant it. You've built something remarkable here against considerable odds. That deserves respect, not undermining. In the silvery moonlight, with the vast Wyoming landscape stretching around them, something shifted between them, a recognition of mutual respect deepening into something more profound. I should turn in, Thea said reluctantly, breaking the moment before it could overwhelm her. Morning comes early, Wade nodded, understanding in his eyes. Good night, Thea. As she lay in bed that night, Thea couldn't help but wonder what it might be like to have Wade Blackburn as more than just an employee. The thought both thrilled and terrified her. After years of fierce independence, the idea of allowing someone into her life, into her heart, felt like a risk greater than any she'd taken before. Harold departed the following morning after breakfast, leaving behind an atmosphere of unresolved tension. His parting words to Thea had been a reminder of his spring deadline, while to Wade, he'd offered a cryptic suggestion to consider all opportunities carefully. With her uncle gone, Thea threw herself into ranch work with renewed determination. If Harold wanted to challenge her right to her inheritance, she would ensure the Hayes ranch was in better condition than ever by spring. Wade matched her intensity without question, working from dawn until dusk alongside her. Together, they repaired outbuildings, tended the herd, and prepared for the approaching winter with methodical efficiency. Yet beneath their focused productivity ran an undercurrent of awareness-stolen glances, lingering moments, conversations that stretched long into the evening by the kitchen fire. As September gave way to October, the first serious cold snap descended on the Wyoming Territory. Thea woke one morning to find frost etching delicate patterns across her bedroom window. The impending winter brought new urgency to their preparations. "We should bring the herd into the sheltered valley today," Thea suggested as she and Wade shared their customary morning coffee. "That north wind feels like it's carrying snow." Wade nodded agreement. "I've finished reinforcing the windbreaks on the north side. Should provide good protection when the real cold hits." Their efficiency as a team had become almost instinctive, each anticipating the other's thoughts and needs with remarkable synchronicity. It was during their ride to the northern pasture, however, that this harmony was truly tested. They had just crested a ridge when Wade suddenly reined his horse to a halt, his expression alert. "Riders," he said tersely, pointing toward a cluster of figures in the distance. "Coming from Willow Creek." Thea squinted against the morning sun. "I count 5, too many for a social call." Without discussion, they urged their horses behind a stand of trees that offered both concealment and a clear view of the approaching riders. As the group drew nearer, Thea recognized Samuel Wilson at the lead. "Wilson and his cronies," she muttered. "What are they doing on my land?" Wade's expression darkened. "Nothing good, I'd wager. Not with that many men." They watched as Wilson directed the other riders to spread out, gesturing toward various features of the landscape as if taking inventory. Their purposeful examination of the property boundaries sent a chill down Thea's spine that had nothing to do with the October wind. "They're surveying," she realized aloud. "Looking at my water access points." Wade nodded grimly. "Classic tactic, identify vulnerabilities before making a move." His hand unconsciously moved to rest on his holstered revolver. "Question is, whose move? Wilson doesn't have the authority to survey property boundaries. But the Cattle Association does," Thea replied, pieces falling into place. "And my uncle sits on their board." Understanding dawned in Wade's eyes. "Your uncle's legal avenues, he's looking for technicalities to challenge your claim." The betrayal stung more than Thea had expected. Despite their differences, she'd never thought Harold would resort to such underhanded tactics. "We need to make our presence known," she decided, gathering her reins. "This is still Hayes' land and they're trespassing." Wade placed a restraining hand on her arm. 5 against 2 aren't odds I like, especially when one of them is Wilson. "Let me approach first, draw their attention while you circle behind. Show them they're surrounded." Thea hesitated, then nodded her agreement. The strategy was sound, even if her instinct was to confront the intruders directly. Wade rode out boldly from their cover, approaching the group with casual confidence. "Morning, gentlemen," he called out, loud enough for Thea to hear as she began her circuitous route. "Bit far from town for a morning ride, aren't you?" Wilson and his companions turned sharply at Wade's voice, hands instinctively moving toward weapons before recognizing him. "Blackburn," Wilson acknowledged coldly. "Just the man we were hoping to find." The unexpected response gave Wade pause. "Is that so, and why would that be?" Wilson dismounted, motioning for the others to stay on their horses. "Got a proposition for you, one that could set you up nicely." By now, Thea had positioned herself on the opposite side of the group, close enough to hear but still partially concealed by a rocky outcropping. She remained silent, listening intently. "I'm employed by Miss Hayes," Wade replied evenly. "Any propositions should be directed to her." Wilson laughed, a harsh sound that carried on the crisp morning air. That's just it, Blackburn. Word has it you're more than just an employee. Harold Hayes seems to think you might have a personal interest in the woman. Wade's expression remained impassive. My relationship with Miss Hayes is not your concern. Maybe not, Wilson conceded with a smirk, but the future of this land is. The cattle associations made a decision. Hayes land would serve the territory better as part of a larger operation. Water rights alone make it valuable. Again, something to discuss with the property owner, Wade replied. Who, in case you've forgotten, is standing right behind you. Wilson whirled around to find Thea emerging from her hiding place, rifle balanced confidently across her saddle. This is private property, Mr. Wilson, she stated firmly. You and your friends are trespassing. Wilson's surprise quickly gave way to contempt. Miss Hayes, always a pleasure. Can't say the same, Thea returned coolly. State your business or leave. Wilson exchanged glances with his companions before addressing her. Just assessing the territory, your uncle has raised some interesting questions about property lines and water rights. Thought we'd see for ourselves. My property lines are clearly defined in my deed, Thea replied. As are my water rights. Any questions can be addressed through proper legal channels, not by skulking around my land uninvited. Legal channels, Wilson repeated with mock thoughtfulness. Interesting you should mention those. Your uncle has uncovered some irregularities in your father's will. Seems Thomas Hayes may not have been of sound mind when he left everything to his daughter instead of his male heir. The accusation hit Thea like a physical blow. That's a lie, she said, her voice dangerously quiet. My father was perfectly sound when he drafted his will. Matter for the courts to decide, Wilson shrugged. In the meantime, your cowboy here might want to consider where he places his loyalty. Cattle Association pays well for men with his skills much better than a struggling female rancher ever could. Wade's expression hardened. I think you've said enough, Wilson. Time for you to move on. Wilson held his gaze for a long moment before remounting his horse. Think about it, Blackburn. No sense tying yourself to a sinking ship. He tipped his hat mockingly toward Thea. Miss Hayes, I suspect we'll be seeing more of each other soon in court. As the riders departed, Thea fought to control the trembling that threatened to overtake her. Anger, fear, and betrayal warred within her, making it difficult to maintain her composed exterior. He's bluffing, Wade said, moving his horse alongside hers. About your father's mental state, it's a common tactic to pressure landowners to sell. Thea nodded, though uncertainty gnawed at her. Pa was as sharp as ever when he wrote that will, but it was only witnessed by Doc Miller and Reverend Parsons. Doc passed last winter, and the Reverend has always been friendly with the Cattle Association. Wade's expression turned thoughtful. Your uncle's timing makes more sense now. Winter's coming hardest season for a ranch this size. He's hoping the combination of natural pressure and legal threats will force your hand. Well, he's wrong, Thea declared, straightening in her saddle. I've weathered worse than Samuel Wilson and his threats. They returned their attention to moving the herd, working with practiced efficiency despite the morning's unsettling encounter. By late afternoon, dark clouds had gathered on the horizon, confirming Thea's prediction of approaching snow. As they rode back toward the ranch house, Wade broke their contemplative silence. Wilson's offer, you should know I have no interest in it. Thea glanced at him, struck by the intensity in his blue eyes. I never thought you did. Good, he said simply, because my loyalty isn't for sale. Especially not to men like Wilson. There was something in his tone, a personal edge that suggested past experience that made Thea curious. Sounds like you've dealt with his type before. Wade's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Men who use money and influence to take what isn't rightfully theirs. Yes, I've had some experience with that kind. Before Thea could inquire further, fat snowflakes began to fall, quickly increasing in intensity. First snow, she observed, tilting her face upward to feel the cold touch of flakes against her skin. Earlier than usual, going to be a hard winter, Wade predicted, studying the heavy clouds. Those are the kinds of storms that last days, not hours. His assessment proved accurate. By evening, the snow was falling steadily, accumulating rapidly across the landscape. After securing the animals and ensuring all buildings were properly sealed against the weather, they retreated to the warmth of the main house. Thea stoked the kitchen fire while Wade removed his snow-covered coat and boots. The domesticity of the scene struck her suddenly how natural it felt to share this space with him, to move around each other with comfortable familiarity. "I should check the smokehouse once more before this gets worse," Wade said, glancing out the window at the thickening snowfall. "The path will be completely covered soon," Thea cautioned. "Take the lantern," Wade nodded, accepting the offered light. "I won't be long." While he was gone, Thea prepared a hearty stew from the preserved vegetables and smoked meat they had stored for winter. The simple act of cooking brought a sense of normalcy that helped settle her nerves after the day's confrontation. When Wade returned, stamping snow from his boots, his cheeks were ruddy from the cold. "Everything's secure," he reported, "but this storm's picking up faster than I expected. Might be worth checking the north barn again before morning." Thea nodded, ladling the hot stew into 2 bowls. "We can go together at first light. For now, you should warm up." They ate by the kitchen fire, discussing practical matters of ranch management while carefully avoiding any mention of Wilson's visit or Harold's apparent betrayal. It was only after the meal, as they lingered over cups of coffee, that Thea broached the subject that had been weighing on her mind. "If what Wilson said is true about my uncle challenging Pa's, well, I could lose everything," she admitted, voicing her deepest fear. "Not just the ranch, but my home. My independence." Wade studied her thoughtfully across the table. "Do you have any legal documentation besides the will? Anything that shows your father's intentions?" Thea considered the question. "Pa kept a journal, wrote in it almost every night for years. I've never read it, felt too personal somehow, but it might contain something useful." "It could establish his state of mind, at least," Wade agreed. "Worth looking at under the circumstances." After some searching, Thea located her father's journal in his old desk drawer, a worn leather-bound book filled with his distinctive slanted handwriting. With reverential care, she brought it to the table. "I feel like I'm invading his privacy," she confessed, hesitating before opening it. "He would understand," Wade assured her gently. "This is about protecting what he built, what he intended for you." With a deep breath, Thea opened the journal to its final entries, written in the weeks before her father's death. Together, they read Thomas Hayes' last recorded thoughts. October 15, 1873, "Winter's coming early this year. Can feel it in my bones. Thea's been running herself ragged getting the ranch prepared. Girl works harder than any man I've ever hired. Harold visited today, same old argument about selling to the association. Doesn't understand that this land isn't just property, it's our legacy. Told him again that Thea will inherit everything. He thinks I'm making a mistake, says a woman can't manage alone. He doesn't know my daughter like I do. She was born for this life." Thea felt tears prick her eyes at her father's confidence in her abilities. She turned the page to the final entry, dated just 3 days before he fell ill. October 28, 1873, "Finalized my will with Judge Parker today. Left everything to Theodora as planned. Harold will be angry, but it's my right to determine who inherits what I've built. My daughter has earned this ranch through sweat and dedication. She understands this land in a way Harold never could. Some will say a woman's place is behind a man, but I've always believed Thea's place is wherever her strength and spirit lead her. And on this land, she is in her element. I only pray she finds someone who recognizes her value not as a woman to stand behind him, but as a partner to stand beside." Wade looked up from the page to find Thea wiping away tears. "Your father knew exactly what he was doing," he said softly, "and he was right about you." Thea closed the journal carefully. "He believed in me when no one else did. I can't let him down now." "You won't," Wade assured her, his hand covering hers briefly across the table. "These journal entries clearly show your father was of sound mind and had specific intentions. If Harold tries to challenge the will, this evidence would be compelling." The howling wind outside had intensified, rattling the windows as the storm gathered strength. Thea rose to add wood to the fire, grateful for the solid construction of the house her father had built. "The storm's getting worse," she observed. You should stay here tonight. The path to the bunkhouse will be impassable by now. Wade hesitated, clearly conscious of propriety. I wouldn't want to compromise your reputation further. Thea gave a humorless laugh. According to Wilson, that ship has already sailed. Besides, there's no one for miles to see or gossip. You can take Pa's old room. After showing Wade to her father's bedroom, Thea retired to her own room across the hall. Sleep eluded her as she listened to the storm's fury and contemplated the challenges that lay ahead. Her uncle's betrayal, Wilson's threats, the approaching winter each would test her resolve in different ways. Yet somehow, with Wade's steady presence, these obstacles seemed less insurmountable. In just a few short weeks, he had become essential to her life in ways that extended far beyond his role as a ranch hand. The realization both comforted and alarmed her. Morning arrived with blinding brightness as sunlight reflected off the snow-covered landscape. Thea rose early, unsurprised to find Wade already in the kitchen, coffee brewing on the stove. Thought you might need this, he said, offering a steaming cup. Storms passed, but we've got at least 2 feet of snow out there. October blizzards are the worst, Thea replied, accepting the coffee gratefully. Too early for the animals to have developed their winter coats, too late to move them to lower pasture. They spent the day checking on the herd and reinforcing shelters, wading through deep snow that made every task more challenging. By dusk, they were both exhausted but satisfied that the ranch had weathered the storm without significant loss. The following weeks established a new pattern. With the heavy snow making the bunkhouse impractical, Wade took up residence in Thomas Hayes' old room. The arrangement was born of necessity, but Thea found herself appreciating the comfort of another presence in the house as winter settled in earnest across the land. Their evenings fell into a companionable routine: shared meals, conversation by the fire, occasional games of checkers or cards. Slowly, their personal histories emerged through these quiet exchanges. Thea learned that Wade had grown up on a small farm in Missouri, had fought briefly for the Union before deserting after witnessing the senseless slaughter at Shiloh, and had spent the years since working various ranches throughout the West. Never stayed anywhere longer than a season or two, he admitted one evening as they sat before the fire. Seemed safer that way. Safer? Thea prompted, curious about his choice of words. Wade was quiet for a long moment, staring into the flames. After the war, I didn't much like who I'd become. Thought maybe if I kept moving, I'd eventually outrun those memories, outrun myself. And did you? She asked softly. A small, sad smile crossed his face. Not yet, but for the first time in a long while, I'm not sure I want to keep running. His gaze met hers across the hearth, and Thea felt the now familiar flutter in her chest that occurred whenever he looked at her that way, as if truly seeing her. In turn, she shared stories of her childhood on the ranch, of her mother's illness and passing, of learning ranching alongside her father. Wade listened with genuine interest, asking questions that revealed his respect for her experiences rather than judgment of her unconventional upbringing. November brought a brief thaw that allowed them to make necessary repairs and check on the more distant parts of the property. It was during one such excursion that they discovered fresh survey markers along the creek that served as the ranch's eastern boundary. Wilson's been busy, Wade observed, examining one of the wooden stakes. These weren't here before the snow. Thea knelt to inspect another marker. They've moved the line almost 50 yards west. That would cut off our primary water access. Wade's expression darkened. Classic water rights dispute. If they can prove ambiguity in the original survey, they could claim this portion of the creek is on contested land, Thea finished grimly. Exactly what Wilson wants. Without clear water rights, the ranch's value plummets. We need to pull these stakes and document the original boundaries, Wade said, already yanking one from the frozen ground. Do you have the original survey maps? Thea nodded. In Pa's desk, he was meticulous about documentation. They spent the afternoon removing the false boundary markers and placing their own stakes at the correct points according to Thomas Hayes' survey maps. As they worked, Thea couldn't help but notice how Wade referred to these problems as we and hour, as if her fight had become his as well. By the time they returned to the ranch house, the sun was setting in a blaze of orange and purple. Wade led the horses to the barn while Thea headed inside to start dinner. She had just begun to prepare their meal when a sharp knock at the door startled her. Cautious after Wilson's recent intrusion, she took her father's shotgun from its place near the door before answering. The sight that greeted her was unexpected. Judge Parker, bundled against the cold, standing on her porch. "Evening, Miss Hayes," the elderly judge said, removing his hat. "Apologize for calling so late, but I've ridden from town on a matter of some urgency." "Judge Parker," Thea acknowledged, lowering the shotgun and stepping aside. "Please come in." The judge entered, gratefully moving toward the kitchen fire. "Appreciate the warmth." "Too old for winter riding, but this couldn't wait." "What brings you all this way, Judge?" Thea asked, offering him a chair at the table. Before he could answer, Wade entered from the back door, pausing when he noticed their visitor. "Judge Parker," he said with a respectful nod. "Blackburn," the judge returned, his sharp eyes taking in Wade's familiar presence in the house. "Good to see you again." Thea glanced between them, surprised. "You two know each other?" "We've met," Wade confirmed without elaboration. "In Colorado," Judge Parker cleared his throat. "I've come about your father's will, Miss Hayes. Troubling developments I thought you should be aware of immediately." Thea felt her stomach tighten. "My uncle's challenge," the judge nodded gravely. "Harold filed formal papers yesterday, claiming your father was not of sound mind when he drafted his will. He submitted affidavits from both Reverend Parsons and Dr. Miller's widow, suggesting Thomas was delusional about your ability to manage the ranch alone." "That's absurd," Thea protested. "Doc Miller fully supported Pa's decision. He said so at the time." "Unfortunately, the doctor isn't here to confirm that," Judge Parker said gently, "and Mrs. Miller seems to have a different recollection, one possibly influenced by a recent generous donation to her late husband's medical fund from the Cattle Association." Wade stepped forward. "We have Thomas Hayes' journal. His final entries clearly demonstrate he was of sound mind and had specific intentions regarding his daughter's inheritance." The judge's bushy eyebrows rose with interest. "A journal, that could be significant evidence." Thea retrieved her father's journal, showing the judge the relevant passages. As he read, his expression grew more determined. "This is exactly the kind of evidence we need," he confirmed. "Personal writings from the deceased clearly documenting his intentions and reasoning. This will be powerful in court." "So you believe we have a case?" Thea asked hopefully. "I believe Thomas Hayes' wishes were clear," the judge affirmed. "But Harold has powerful allies. The Cattle Association wants this land, and they're not above using underhanded tactics to get it. Like falsifying boundary markers," Wade suggested, explaining their discovery at the creek. Judge Parker shook his head in disgust. "Typical play. They're trying to devalue your property by creating uncertainty about water rights." "What should we do?" Thea asked, feeling overwhelmed by the coordinated assault on her inheritance. The judge considered for a moment. "First, we document everything: the original boundary markers, your father's journal, any correspondence that shows his intentions. Second, we prepare for a formal hearing. I'll set it for after the new year." "That's 2 months away," Thea pointed out. "What happens in the meantime?" "You continue operating as the legal owner," Judge Parker assured her. "Harold can file all the challenges he wants, but until a court rules otherwise, this ranch is still yours." After sharing a quick meal with them, the judge prepared to depart, declining their offer to stay the night. At the door, he paused, looking thoughtfully at Wade. "Interesting to find you here, Blackburn. Last I heard, you were headed to California." Wade shrugged slightly. "Found something worth staying for?" The judge's gaze shifted between him and Thea, a knowing look in his eyes. "I see. Well, perhaps that's for the best. Miss Hayes could use an ally with your particular experience." After the judge had gone, Thea turned to Wade, curiosity burning. "What did he mean by your particular experience?" Wade hesitated, conflict evident in his expression. "It's a long story." "We have time," Thea said quietly, leading him back to the fire. Wade settled into his chair, staring into the flames for a long moment before beginning. Before coming here, I worked for a time as a legal investigator in Denver. Specialized in land disputes, particularly cases where powerful interests tried to push out smaller landowners. Thea's eyes widened. You're not just a ranch hand. I am a ranch hand, Wade clarified. Grew up working cattle, know the business well, but after the war, I needed something different, a way to fight injustice without violence. So you became an investigator, Thea said, pieces falling into place. That explains how you recognized Wilson's tactics so quickly. Wade nodded. I've seen it all before. The boundary disputes, the challenges to legal documents, the pressure campaigns. I worked with Judge Parker on several cases in Colorado. He's one of the few honest judges left in these territories. And my uncle? Thea asked, an uncomfortable suspicion forming. Did you know about his connection to the Cattle Association before coming here? Wade met her gaze directly. Yes, your uncle approached me in Rock Springs, offered me a job checking on his troubled niece, said he was concerned about your ability to manage alone. So you took the job too. What? Spy on me. Thea felt a cold disappointment spreading through her chest. At first, I was simply curious, Wade admitted. Wanted to see for myself if Harold's concerns had any merit. It didn't take long to realize they didn't. You're one of the most capable ranchers I've ever met, male or female. Thea studied him, hurt and confusion warring with her growing feelings for this man. Why stay then? Why not tell my uncle the truth and move on? Wade's expression softened. Because I recognized what was happening. The same pattern I'd seen dozens of times, powerful men conspiring to take what rightfully belonged to someone they deemed weaker. I couldn't walk away from that, and then, Thea prompted when he trailed off. And then I got to know you, he said simply. Your strength, your determination, your love for this land. Walking away became impossible. The raw honesty in his voice struck Thea deeply. Whatever his initial motives, Wade Blackburn had become her staunchest ally, perhaps something more. Does my uncle know you've switched sides? She asked. Wade shook his head. Not explicitly, though after today's visit from Judge Parker he'll figure it out soon enough. What happens then? Thea wondered aloud. They'll try something more direct, Wade predicted grimly. Men like Wilson and your uncle don't accept defeat easily. We should be prepared for anything. His words proved prophetic sooner than either expected. 3 days later, as they returned from checking the herd, they spotted smoke rising from the direction of the main house. Fire, Thea gasped, urging her horse into a gallop. They arrived to find the hay barn fully engulfed in flames, the heat so intense they couldn't approach within 50 yards. Despite their desperate efforts with buckets from the well, there was no saving the structure or its contents, nearly half the winter feed supply for the cattle. As the flames finally died down, leaving only smoldering ruins, Wade examined the area around the barn's foundation. This wasn't an accident, he announced grimly, pointing to several locations where the fire had clearly been set. Multiple points of origin, deliberate arson. Thea stared at the destruction, a cold fury replacing her initial shock. Wilson, it has to be, likely, Wade agreed, or someone working for him. Classic intimidation tactic: destroy resources, create hardship, force a vulnerable owner to sell. What do we do now? Thea asked, surveying the loss of hay that had represented hundreds of hours of summer labor. Without that feed, we'll lose half the herd before spring. Wade's expression was determined. First, we report this to the sheriff, document the arson, make it official. Then we figure out how to replace the feed. Sheriff Dawson arrived the following day, made a cursory examination of the burned barn, and produced a conclusion that infuriated Thea. Probably an accident, he declared, barely glancing at the evidence Wade pointed out. Hay spontaneously combusts sometimes, happens when it's stored wet. That hay was properly cured, Thea objected. And what about the multiple starting points? That's not spontaneous combustion, the sheriff shrugged, already heading back to his horse. Can't say for certain. No witnesses, no proof of foul play. After he'd gone, Thea kicked at the charred remains in frustration. He didn't even try to investigate. The Cattle Association clearly has him in their pocket too. Which means we can't count on official help, Wade concluded. We'll have to handle this ourselves. The feed situation was critical. Without the stored hay, the cattle would starve before spring, exactly what Wilson and Harold were counting on. Selling off half the herd would provide temporary relief, but would cripple the ranch's future viability. "There's one option we haven't considered," Wade said that evening as they discussed their limited choices. "The Morrison Ranch to the south has surplus hay this year. Old man Morrison mentioned it when I ran into him in town last month." "The Morrisons have been trying to buy our south pasture for years," Thea reminded him. "They won't sell to us out of kindness." "No," Wade agreed, "but they might sell for the right price or the right trade." After much discussion, they decided to approach the Morrisons with an offer. Access rights to the South Spring during summer months in exchange for enough hay to get the Hayes herd through winter. It wasn't an ideal solution. The spring was valuable, but it would preserve the core of the ranch's operation until spring. To Thea's surprise, Old Man Morrison agreed to the terms, albeit with obvious satisfaction at having finally gained access to the coveted spring. The arrangement would allow the Hayes Ranch to survive the winter with its herd intact, a crucial victory, if a costly one. As December arrived with bitter cold, Thea and Wade settled into an intensified partnership, their shared adversity cementing a bond that had been growing since his arrival. The legal challenge still loomed after the new year, but they had secured the ranch's immediate survival. It was during this period of relative calm that their relationship began to shift subtly. Lingering glances became more frequent, conversations more personal, the space between them charged with unspoken possibility. One evening, as they sat before the fire after a particularly grueling day of ranch work, Wade finally broached the subject that had been hovering between them. "Your uncle returns from Cheyenne next week," he said, watching her reaction carefully. "He'll expect an answer regarding his marriage ultimatum." Thea sighed, setting aside her mending. "He can expect whatever he wants." "I have no intention of marrying just to satisfy his outdated notions of propriety." "What about marrying for other reasons?" Wade asked quietly, his gaze steady on her face. The question hung in the air between them, weighted with implications. Thea felt her heart quicken as she met his eyes across the hearth. "What other reasons would you suggest?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Wade set down his coffee cup and moved to kneel beside her chair, taking her work-roughened hands in his. "Love, perhaps, partnership. Mutual respect and admiration." Thea studied his face, searching for any sign of calculation or ulterior motive. She found only sincerity in his clear blue eyes. "Wade Blackburn," she said slowly, "are you proposing to me?" A smile touched his lips. "I believe I am. Though I admit it's not the romantic setting I might have planned." "I don't need romance," Thea replied honestly. "I need truth. Why would you want to marry me? Is it because of my uncle's challenge? Because you feel obligated to help me keep the ranch?" Wade shook his head firmly. "I want to marry you because in the months I've known you, Theodora Hayes, I've discovered a woman of extraordinary courage, integrity, and determination. A woman I've grown to love more than I thought possible." He squeezed her hands gently. "The ranch is your legacy, and I would be honored to help you preserve it, but make no mistake, it's you I want, not your land." Tears pricked at Thea's eyes, unexpected emotion welling up at his words. "People will say you married me for the property," she warned. "That I married you because I couldn't manage alone." "Let them talk," Wade replied with a dismissive shrug. "We'll know the truth, that we stand together not because either of us needs the other to survive, but because together we're stronger than we are apart." Thea studied him for a long moment, this man who had entered her life as a stranger and become essential to it. She thought of her father's final journal entry, his hope that she would find someone who recognized her value as a partner, not a possession. "Yes," she said finally, a smile breaking through her tears. "Yes, I'll marry you, Wade Blackburn." His answering smile was brilliant as he leaned forward to kiss her, their first kiss, tentative at first, then deepening with the emotions they'd both kept carefully controlled for months. When they finally parted, breathless and laughing, Thea rested her forehead against his. "My father would have liked you," she whispered. I hope to live up to his expectations, Wade replied, his arms still around her. And yours. They were married 2 days later by Judge Parker, who rode out specially for the occasion. The simple ceremony took place in the Hayes ranch house with only the judge as witness. There were no elaborate preparations, no guests, just two people committing their lives to each other before the law and God. Harold Hayes arrived the following day, his expression thunderous when he learned of the marriage. He burst into the ranch house unannounced, finding Thea and Wade sharing breakfast at the kitchen table. "What is the meaning of this?" he demanded, waving a telegram. "Judge Parker informs me you two have married without family consent." Thea rose calmly to face her uncle. "I wasn't aware I needed consent, Uncle Harold. I'm of legal age and sound mind." Harold turned his glare on Wade. "This was your plan all along, wasn't it, Blackburn? Gain her trust, then secure your position by marrying the property owner." Wade remained seated, his posture relaxed despite the tension in the room. "I married Thea because I love her," he stated simply. "The ranch is hers, her name remains on the deed. I'm simply her husband and partner." Harold's face flushed with anger. "This changes nothing about my legal challenge. The court will still hear my petition regarding Thomas's mental state." "By all means," Thea replied, her confidence bolstered by Wade's steady presence. "We look forward to presenting Father's journal as evidence of his intentions, along with testimony about recent attempts to intimidate me through arson and falsified boundary markers." Harold's expression flickered momentarily. "I know nothing about any fire or boundary disputes." "Perhaps not directly," Wade interjected, his tone deceptively casual. "But your associates at the Cattle Association might be less ignorant. Samuel Wilson, for instance, has been quite active on your behalf." Speculation and hearsay, Harold dismissed, though his confidence seemed less certain. "The court deals in facts, indeed it does," Wade agreed. "Like the fact that Judge Parker has already reviewed Thomas Hayes' journal and found it compelling evidence of his sound mind and clear intentions. Or the fact that I've documented every suspicious incident since arriving here, building a case that points to a coordinated effort to force Thea off her land." Harold's gaze darted between them, calculation replacing his initial bluster. "You're more than a simple ranch hand, aren't you, Blackburn?" Wade smiled thinly. "Let's just say I understand how these land disputes typically unfold and how to counter such tactics effectively." For the first time, uncertainty crept into Harold's expression. "What exactly are you proposing?" "A compromise," Thea answered before Wade could speak. "Withdraw your legal challenge. Acknowledge my rightful ownership of the Hayes Ranch. In return, we'll grant you grazing rights on the North Quarter section for your Rock Springs property." It was a generous offer, perhaps too generous, given Harold's underhanded tactics, but it would end the conflict cleanly and allow them to focus on rebuilding what had been damaged. Harold considered the proposal, clearly weighing his chances in court against the certainty of immediate gain. "The North Quarter and water rights to the creek," he countered. "The North Quarter only," Wade stated firmly. "The water rights remain with the main property." After further negotiation, they reached an agreement. Harold would withdraw his legal challenge and publicly acknowledge Thea's rightful ownership. In exchange, he would receive limited grazing rights on the North Quarter for 5 years, a compromise that protected the core of the Hayes Ranch while offering Harold a face-saving concession. As her uncle prepared to leave, Thea felt a weight lift from her shoulders. The ranch was secure. Her father's legacy would continue under her stewardship, with Wade as her partner in all things. "Your father would be proud," Harold admitted grudgingly as he mounted his horse. "He always said you had more spine than sense." Seems he was right about the first part, at least. Coming from Harold, it was as close to a compliment as Thea had ever received. She nodded acknowledgement, standing tall beside her husband as they watched her uncle ride away. "Think he'll honor the agreement?" she asked Wade as the figure disappeared into the distance. "He will," Wade confirmed. "Harold's many things, but he's not foolish enough to cross Judge Parker. Besides, I suspect the Cattle Association will find other, less troublesome targets now." Turning to face her fully, Wade took her hands in his. "So, Mrs. Blackburn, what shall we do with this ranch of ours now that it's secure?" Thea smiled, still getting used to her new name while appreciating that Wade had never expected her to surrender her independence along with her hand in marriage. "First, we rebuild what was destroyed," she decided. "Then we expand." The Morrison Spring access gives us new possibilities for the South pasture. Maybe it's time to diversify beyond cattle. Wade nodded approvingly. "Horses, perhaps. I noticed you have an excellent eye for horseflesh." "I was thinking the same," Thea agreed, excitement building as they began to plan their future together. "With your experience and my knowledge of this land, we could develop one of the finest horse breeding operations in the territory." As the winter sun cast long shadows across the snow-covered landscape, they walked arm in arm toward the barn to begin the evening chores. The path ahead would not be easy ranching, never was, but they would face its challenges together as equal partners. 5 years later, the Hayes Blackburn Ranch had indeed become known throughout the Wyoming Territory for its exceptional horses, particularly a distinctive line of sturdy, intelligent mounts ideal for ranch work. The operation had expanded to include a respected training program, with Wade's natural affinity for breaking horses complementing Thea's shrewd business acumen. On a warm summer evening, they sat on the porch of their expanded home, watching their 3-year-old daughter Elizabeth chase fireflies in the yard. Beside Thea's rocking chair, a cradle held their newborn son Thomas, named for the grandfather whose legacy continued to shape their lives. "Delivery came today," Wade mentioned, handing Thea an official-looking envelope. "Final paperwork for the territory land grant. The North Pasture expansion is officially ours." Thea smiled, glancing at the document before returning her gaze to their daughter's delighted explorations. "Pa always said this land had potential beyond what we could see. I think he'd be pleased with how we've realized that vision." Wade reached over to take her hand, his touch still sending the same warmth through her after all these years. "He'd be most pleased with you, I think." "The woman who refused to be defined by others' expectations." "We've both defied expectations," Thea reminded him. "The drifter who found a home, the stubborn woman who accepted a partner." Their quiet moment was interrupted as little Elizabeth ran up to the porch, her small hands cupped around a captured firefly. "Look, Mama, Papa, I caught one." Wade lifted their daughter onto his lap, helping her hold her hands correctly to observe the insect without harming it. "Gentle now, just like with the foals," he instructed. "Sometimes the strongest people are the most gentle with things smaller than themselves." Thea watched them, her heart full. In the distance, the setting sun painted the Wyoming landscape in hues of gold and amber, illuminating the ranch that had nearly been taken from her. The battles had been won, the hardships overcome not by surrender to convention, but by finding strength in partnership. "They said my place was behind a man," she mused aloud, remembering all those who had doubted her ability to maintain her father's legacy. Wade looked up, his eyes meeting hers with the same steadfast devotion that had sustained them through every challenge. "And I'll always stand behind you," he promised, "or beside you, or wherever you need me to be." As darkness settled over the land they both loved, Thea Hayes Blackburn knew with absolute certainty that she had found exactly where she belonged, not behind a man, not before him, but alongside the partner who recognized her true worth. Together, they had built something neither could have created alone. A legacy of love, respect, and determination that would endure long after they were gone. In the years to come, the Hayes Blackburn Ranch would become legendary in Wyoming Territory, not just for its fine horses or prosperous operations, but for the remarkable partnership at its heart. A testament to two people who had redefined what it meant to share a life and a dream, challenging the constraints of their time to forge their own path forward. And whenever anyone remarked with surprise on how Thea ran the ranch as an equal with her husband, Wade Blackburn would simply smile and say, "Why would I want her behind me when she sees things I might miss? We're stronger side by side." It was a philosophy that would guide not only their marriage, but also the way they raised their children, teaching both their daughter and son that true strength came not from dominance, but from mutual respect. In time, Elizabeth and Thomas would grow to embody these values, carrying forward the legacy their grandfather had begun, and their parents had transformed into something even greater than he could have envisioned. As for Thea and Wade, they never forgot how their journey together had begun with a woman refusing to surrender what was rightfully hers, and a man who recognized that the most honorable place to stand was not in front of her, but behind her when she needed support, beside her when she needed partnership, and occasionally out of her way when she needed to forge ahead on her own. In a time when a woman's place was rigidly defined, they had created their own definition. And in doing so, they had built not just a successful ranch, but a life of extraordinary richness and meaning together.